Dedication of Rhyme and Reason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anusha Iyer. Rhyme and Reason by Lewis Carroll. Dedication. Inscribed to a dear child, in memory of golden summer hours and whispers of a summer sea. Girt with a boyish garb for boyish task, eager she wields her spade, yet loves as well rest on a friendly knee, intent to ask the tale one loves to tell. Rude scoffer of the seething outer strife, unmeet to read her pure and simple sprite, deem, if thou wilt, such hours a waste of life, empty of all delight. Chat on, sweet maid, and rescue from annoy hearts that by wiser talk are unbeguiled. Ah, happy he who owns that tenderest joy, the heart-love of a child. Away, fond thoughts, and vex my soul no more. Work claims my wakeful nights, my busy days, albeit bright memories of that sunlit shore yet haunt my dreaming gaze. End of dedication.
Phantasmagoria in 7 Cantos. 1. The Trysting, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Sanober Faxiliad. One winter night at 9:30, cold, tired, and cross and muddy, I had come home too late to dine, and supper with cigars and wine was waiting in the study. There was a strangeness in the room, and something white and wavy was standing near me in the gloom. I took it for the carpet broom left by that careless slavey. But presently the thing began to shiver and to sneeze, on which I said, "Come, come, my man, that's a most inconsiderate plan. Less noise there, if you please." "I've caught a cold," the thing replies, "out there upon the landing." I turned to look in some surprise, and there before my very eyes a little ghost was standing. He trembled when he caught my eye, and got behind a chair. "How came you here," I said, "and why? I never saw a thing so shy. Come out, don't shiver there." He said, "I'd gladly tell you how, and also tell you why, but," here he gave a little bow, "you're in so bad a temper now, you'd think it all a lie. And as to being in a fright, allow me to remark that ghosts have just as good a right in every way to fear the light as men to fear the dark." "No, please," said I, "can well excuse such cowardice in you, for ghosts can visit when they choose, whereas we humans can't refuse to grant the interview." He said, "A flutter of alarm is not unnatural, is it? I really feared you meant some harm, but now I see that you are calm, let me explain my visit. Houses are classed, I beg to state, according to the number of ghosts that they accommodate. The tenant merely counts his weight with coals and other lumber. This is a one-ghost house, and you, when you arrived last summer, may have remarked a spectre who was doing all that ghosts can do to welcome the newcomer. In villas this is always done, however cheaply rented, for though of course there's less of fun when there's only room for one, ghosts have to be contented. That spectre left you on the 3rd, since then you've not been haunted, for as he never sent us word, 'twas quite by accident we heard that anyone was wanted. A spectre has first choice by right in filling up a vacancy, then phantom, goblin, elf, and sprite. If all these fail them, they invite the nicest ghoul that they can see. The spectre said the place was low, and that you kept bad wine, so as a phantom had to go, and I was first, of course, you know, I couldn't well decline." "No doubt," said I, "they settled who was fittest to be sent, yet still to choose a brat like you to haunt a man of 42 was no great compliment." I'm not so young, sir, he replied, as you might think. The fact is, in cabins by the waterside and other places that I've tried, I've had a lot of practice. But I've never taken yet a strict domestic part, and in my flurry I forget the 5 good rules of etiquette we have to know by heart. My sympathies were warming fast towards the little fellow. He was so utterly aghast at having found a man at last, and looked so scared and yellow. "At least," I said, "I'm glad to find a ghost is not a dumb thing. But pray sit down. You'll feel inclined, if, like myself, you have not dined, to take a snack of something, though certainly you don't appear a thing to offer food to, and then I shall be glad to hear, if you will say them loud and clear, the rules that you allude to." "Thanks, you shall hear them by and by. This is a piece of luck. What may I offer you?" said I. "Well, since you are so kind, I'll try a little bit of duck." "One slice, and may I ask you for another drop of gravy?" I sat and looked at him in awe, for certainly I never saw a thing so white and wavy. And still he seemed to grow more white, more vapoury. Phantasmagoria in 7 Cantos. 2. His 5 Rules. By Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Sanober Huxayed. "My first, but don't suppose," he said, "I'm setting you a riddle, is if your victim be in bed, don't touch the curtains at his head, but take them in the middle, and wave them slowly in and out while drawing them asunder, and in a minute's time, no doubt, he'll raise his head and look about with eyes of wrath and wonder. And here you must on no pretence make the first observation. Wait for the victim to commence. No ghost of any common sense begins a conversation. If he should say, 'How came you here?' the way that you began, sir, in such a case your course is clear. 'On the bat's back, my little dear,' is the appropriate answer. If after this he says no more, you'd best perhaps curtail your exertions, go and shake the door, and then if he begins to snore, you'll know the thing's a failure. By day, if he should be alone, at home or on a walk, you merely give a hollow groan, to indicate the kind of tone in which you mean to talk. But if you find him with his friends, the thing is rather harder. In such a case success depends on picking up some candle ends or butter in the larder. With this you make a kind of slide, it answers best with suet, on which you must contrive to glide, and swing yourself from side to side. One soon learns how to do it. The second tells us what is right in ceremonious calls. First burn a blue or crimson light, a thing I quite forgot tonight, then scratch the door or walls. I said, "You'll visit here no more if you attempt the guy. I'll have no bonfires on my floor, and as for the scratching at the door, I'd like to see you try." The third was written to protect the interests of the victim, and tells us, as I recollect, to treat him with a grave respect, and not to contradict him. "That's plain," said I, as tear and trapped to any comprehension. "I only wish some ghosts I've met would not so constantly forget the maxim that you mention." "Perhaps," he said, "you first transgress the laws of hospitality. All ghosts instinctively detest the man that fails to treat his guests with proper cordiality. If you address a ghost as 'thing,' or strike him with a hatchet, he is permitted by the king to drop all formal parleying, and then you're sure to catch it. The fourth prohibits trespassing where other ghosts are quartered, and those convicted of the thing, unless when pardoned by the king, must instantly be slaughtered. That simply means be cut up small. Ghosts soon unite anew. The process scarcely hurts at all, not more than when you're what you call cut up by a review. The fifth is one you may prefer that I should court entire. The king must be addressed as Sir. This from a simple courtier is all the laws require. But should you wish to do the thing with out-and-out politeness, accost him as 'My Goblin King,' and always use in answering the phrase 'Your Royal Whiteness.' I'm getting rather hoarse, I fear, after so much reciting, so if you don't object, Phantasmagoria in 7 Cantos 3 Scarmoges by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Sanober Huxayev. "And did you really walk," said I, "on such a wretched night? I always fancied ghosts could fly, if not exactly in the sky, yet at a fairish height." "It's very well," said he, "for kings to soar above the earth, but phantoms often find that wings, like many other pleasant things, cost more than they're worth. Spectres, of course, are rich, and so can buy them from the elves, but we prefer to keep below. They're stupid company, you know, for any but themselves. For though they claim to be exempt from pride, they treat a phantom as something quite beneath contempt, just as no turkey ever dreamt of noticing a bantam." "They seem too proud," said I, "to go to houses such as mine. Pray, how did they contrive to know so quickly that the place was low and that I kept bad wine?" "Inspector Cobalt came to you," the little ghost began. Here I broke in. "Inspector who?" "Inspecting ghosts is something new. Explain yourself, my man." "His name is Cobalt," said my guest. "One of the spectre order. You very often see him dressed in a yellow gown, a crimson vest, and a nightcap with a border. He tried the Brocken business first, but caught a sort of chill, so came to England to be nursed, and here it took the form of thirst, which he complains of still. Port wine, he says, when rich and sound, warms his old bones like nectar, and as the inn's waiters found are his special hunting ground, we call him the Inspector." I bore it like a man, this agonizing witticism, and nothing could be sweeter than my temper till the ghost began some most provoking criticism. "Cooks need not be indulged in waste, yet still you'd better teach them. Dishes should have some sort of taste. Pray, why are all the cruets placed where nobody can reach them? That man of yours will never earn his living as a waiter. Is that queer thing supposed to burn? It's far too dismal a concern to call a moderator. The duck was tender, but the peas were very much too old. And just remember, if you please, the next time you have toasted cheese, don't let them sundered cold. You'd find the bread improved, I think, by getting better flour. And have you anything to drink that looks a little less like ink and isn't quite so sour?" Then, peering round with curious eyes, he muttered, "Goodness gracious!" and so went on to criticise. "Your room's an inconvenient size. It's neither snug nor spacious. That narrow window, I expect, serves but to let the dusk in. But please," said I, "to recollect, 'twas fashioned by an architect who pinned his faith on Ruskin." "I don't care who he was, sir, or on whom he pinned his faith. Constructed by whatever law, so poor a job I never saw, as I'm a living wraith. What a remarkable cigar! How much are they a dozen?" I growled, "No matter what they are, you're getting as familiar as if you're my cousin. Now that's a thing I will not stand, and so I tell you flat." "Aha!" said he, "we're getting grand. Taking a bottle in his hand, I'll soon arrange for that." And here he took a careful aim, and gaily cried, "Here goes!" I tried to dodge it as it came, but somehow caught it all the same exactly on my nose. And I remember nothing more that I can clearly fix till I was sitting on the floor, repeating 2 and 5 are 4, but 5 and 2 are 6. What really passed I never learned, nor guessed. I only know that when at last my sense returned, the lamp neglected, dimly burned, the fire was getting low. Through driving mist I seemed to see a thing that smirked and Phantasmagoria in 7 Cantos 4 His Nourriture by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Sanober Huxayev. Oh, when I was a little ghost, a merry time had we. Each seated on his favourite post, we chumped and chopped the buttered toast they gave us for our tea. "That story is in print," I cried. "Don't say it's not, because it's known as well as Bradshaw's Guide," the Ghost uneasily replied. He hardly thought it was. "It's not in nursery rhymes, and yet I almost think it is. 3 little ghostesses were set on postesses, you know, and ate their buttered toastesses." I have the book, so if you doubt it, I turned to search the shelf. "Don't stir!" he cried. "We'll do without it. I now remember all about it. I wrote the thing myself. It came out in a monthly, or at least my agent said it did. Some literary swell who saw it thought it seemed adapted for the magazine he edited. My father was a brownie, sir. My mother was a fairy. The notion had occurred to her that children would be happier if they were taught to vary. The notion soon became a craze, and when it once began, she brought us all out in different ways. One was a pixie, 2 were fays, another was a banshee. The fat and kelpie went to school, and gave a lot of trouble. Next came a poltergeist and ghoul, and then 2 trolls which broke the rule, a goblin and a double. If that's a snuff-box on the shelf," he added with a yawn, "I'll take a pinch. Next came an elf, and then a phantom, that's myself, and last a leprechaun. One day some spectres chanced to call, dressed in the usual white. I stood and watched them in the hall, and couldn't make them out at all, they seemed so strange a sight. I wondered what on earth they were, that looked all head and sack. My mother told me not to stare, and then she twitched me by the hair and punched me in the back. Since then I've often wished that I had been a spectre born. But what's the use?" he heaved a sigh. "They are the ghost nobility, and look on us with scorn. My phantom life was soon begun. When I was barely 6 I went out with an older one, and just at first I thought it fun, and learned a lot of tricks. I've haunted dungeons, castles, towers, wherever I was sent. I've often sat and howled for hours, drenched to the skin with driving showers, upon a battlement. It's quite old-fashioned now to groan when you begin to speak. This is the newest thing in tone, and here it chills me to the bone." He gave an awful squeak. "Perhaps," he added, "to your ear that sounds an easy thing. Try it yourself, my little dear. It took me something like a year, with constant practising. And when you've learned to squeak, my man, and caught the double sob, you're pretty much where you began. Just try and gibber if you can. That's something like a job. I've tried it, and can only say I'm sure you couldn't do it, even if you practise night and day, unless you have a turn that way and natural ingenuity. Shakespeare, I think it is, who treats of ghosts in days of old, who gibbered in the Roman streets, dressed, if you recollect, in sheets. They must have found it cold. I've often spent £10 and stuff in dressing as a double, but though it answers as a puff, it never has effect enough to make it worth the trouble. Long Bill soon quenched the little thirst I had for being funny. The setting up is always worst. Such heaps of things you want at first. One must be made of money. For instance, take a haunted tower, with skull, crossbones, and sheets, blue lights to burn, say 2 an hour, condensing lens of extra power, and set of chains complete. What with the things you have to hire, the fitting on the rope, and testing all the coloured fire, the outfit of itself would tire the patience of the job. And then they're so fastidious, the haunted house committee. I've often known them make a fuss because a ghost was French or Russ, or even from the city. Some dialects are objected to. For one, the Irish brogue is, and then for all you have to do, £1 of Phantasmagoria in 7 cantos. 5. Bickerment, by Lewis Carroll. read@LibriVox.org by Sanober Huxley. "Don't they consult the victims, though?" I said. "They should, by rights, give them a chance, because, you know, the tastes of people differ so, especially in sprites." The Phantom shook his head and smiled. "Consult them? Not a bit. 'Twould be a job to drive one wild. To satisfy one child there'd be no end to it." "Of course you can't leave the children free," said I, "to pick and choose. But in the case of men like me, I think mine host might fairly be allowed to state his views." He said, "It really wouldn't pay. Folk are so full of fancies. We visit for a single day, and whether then we go or stay depends on circumstances. And though we don't consult mine host before the thing's arranged, still if he often quits his post, or is not a well-mannered ghost, then you can have him changed. But if the host a man like you, I mean a man of sense, and if the house is not too new, why, what has that, said I, to do with ghost convenience? A new house does not suit, you know. It's such a job to trim it, that after 20 years or so, the wainscotings begin to go, so 20 is the limit. To trim was not a phrase I could remember having heard. Perhaps, I said, you'll be so good as tell me what is understood exactly by that word. It means the loosening all the doors, the ghost replied and laughed. It means the drilling holes by scores in all the skirting boards and floors to make a thorough draught. You'll sometimes find that one or two are all you really need to let the wind come whistling through, but here there'll be a lot to do. I faintly gasped, indeed. If I'd been rather later, I'll be bound, I added, trying most unsuccessfully to smile, you'd have been busy all this while trimming and beautifying. Why, no, said he, perhaps I should have stayed another minute, but still no ghost that's any good without an introduction would have ventured to begin it. The proper thing, as you were late, was certainly to go, but with the roads in such a state, I got the nightmare's leave to wait for half an hour or so. "Who's the nightmare?" I cried. Instead of answering my question, "Well, if you don't know that," he said, "either you never go to bed, or you've a grand digestion. He goes about and sits on folk that eat too much at night. His duties are to pinch and poke and squeeze them till they nearly choke." I said, "It serves 'em right." "And folk that sup on things like these," he muttered, "eggs and bacon, lobster and duck and toasted cheese, if they don't get an awful squeeze, I'm very much mistaken. He is immensely fat, and so well suits the occupation. In point of fact, if you must know, we used to call him years ago the Mayor and Corporation. The day he was elected mayor, I know that every sprite meant to vote for me, but did not dare, he was so frantic with despair and furious with excitement. When it was over, for a whim he ran to tell the king, and being the reverse of slim, a 2-mile trot was not for him a very easy thing. So to reward him for his run, as it was baking hot, and he was over 20 stone, the king proceeded, half in fun, to knight him on the spot. 'Twas a great liberty to take. I fired up like a rocket. He did it just for punning's sake. The man, says Johnson, that would make a pun would pick a pocket. A man, he said, is not a king. I argued for a while, and did my best to prove the thing, the phantom merely listening with a contemptuous smile. At last, when breath and patience spent, I had recourse to smoking. "Your aim," he said, "is excellent, but when you call it argument, of course you're only joking." Stung by his cold and snaky eye, I roused myself at length to say, "At least I do defy the veriest sceptic to deny that union is strength." "That's true enough," said he, "yet stay." I listened in all meekness. "Union is strength, I'm bound to say. In fact, the Phantasmagoria in 7 cantos. 6. Discomfiture by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Sanober Huxley. As one who strives a hill to climb, who never climbed before, who finds it in a little time grow every moment less sublime, and rates the thing a bore, yet having once begun to try, dares not desert his quest, but climbing ever keeps his eye on one small hut against the sky, wherein he hopes to rest. Who climbs till nerve and force are spent, with many a puff and pant, who still as rises the ascent, in language grows more violent, although in breath more scant, who climbing gains at length the place that crowns the upward track, and entering with unsteady pace, receives a buffet in the face that lands him on his back, and feels himself like one in sleep, glides swiftly down again, a helpless weight from steep to steep, till with a headlong giddy sweep he drops upon the plain. So I, that had resolved to bring conviction to a ghost, and found it quite a different thing from any human arguing, yet dared not quit my post. But keeping still the end in view, to which I hoped to come, I strove to prove the matter true by putting everything I knew into an axiom. Commencing every single phrase with therefore or because, I blindly reeled 100 ways about the syllogistic maze, unconscious where I was. Quoth he, "That's regular claptrap, don't bluster any more. Now do be cool and take a nap." Such a ridiculous old chap was never seen before. "You're like a man I used to meet, who got one day so furious in arguing, the simple heat scorched both his slippers off his feet." I said, "That's very curious." "Well, it is curious, I agree, and sounds perhaps like fibs, but still it's true as true can be, as sure as your name's Tibbs," said he. I said, "My name's not Tibbs." "Not Tibbs!" he cried. His tone became a shade or two less hearty. "Why, no," said I, "my proper name is Tibbets." "Tibbets! Aye, the same." "Why, then you're not the party." With that he struck the boat a blow that shivered half the glasses. "Why couldn't you have told me so 3/4 of an hour ago, you prince of all the arses? To walk 4 miles through mud and rain, to spend the night in smoking, and then to find that it's in vain, and have to do it all again, it's really too provoking." "Don't talk!" he cried, as I began to mutter some excuse. "Who can have patience with a man that's got no more discretion than an idiotic goose? To keep me waiting here, instead of telling me at once that this was not the house," he said. "There, that'll do. Be off to bed. Don't gape like that, you dunce. It's very fine to throw the blame on me in such a fashion. Why didn't you inquire my name the very minute that you came?" I answered in passion. "Of course it worries you a bit to come so far on foot, but how was I to blame for it?" "Well, well," said he, "I must admit that isn't badly put. And certainly you've given me the best of wine and victual. Excuse my violence," said he, "but accidents like this, you see, they put one out a little. 'Twas my fault, after all, I find. Shake hands, old Turnip-top." The name was hardly to my mind, but as no doubt he meant it kind, I let the matter drop. "Good night, old Turnip-top, good night. When I'm gone, perhaps they'll send you some inferior sprite, who'll keep you in a constant fright, and spoil your soundest naps. Tell him you'll stand no sort of trick. Then if he leers and chuckles, you just be handy with a stick. Mind that it's pretty hard and thick, and rap him on the knuckles. Then carelessly remark, 'Oh, Coon, perhaps you're not aware that if you don't behave, you'll soon be chuckling to another tune, and so you'd best take care.' That's the right way to cure a sprite of such like goings on. But gracious me, it's getting light. Good night, old Turnip-top." Phantasmagoria in 7 cantos. 7. Sad Souvenirs by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Sonober Huxayan. "What's this?" I pondered. "Have I slept? Or can I have been drinking?" But soon a gentler feeling crept upon me, and I sat and wept an hour or so, like winking. "No need for Bones to hurry so," I sobbed. "In fact, I doubt if it was worth his while to go. And who is Tibbs, I'd like to know, to make such work about?" "If Tibbs is anything like me, it's possible," I said. "He won't be over pleased to be dropped upon at 3:30 after he's snug in bed. And if Bones plagues him anyhow, squeaking and all the rest of it, as he was doing here just now, I prophesy there'll be a row, and Tibbs will have the best of it." Then, as my tears could never bring the friendly phantom back, it seemed to me the proper thing to mix another glass and sing the following coronach: "And art thou gone, beloved Ghost, best of familiars? Nay, then, farewell, my duckling roast. Farewell, farewell, my tea and toast, my meerschaum and cigars. The hues of life are dull and grey, the sweets of life insipid, when thou, my charmer, art away, all brick, or rather let me say, all parallelepiped." Instead of singing verse the third, I ceased, abruptly rather, but after such a splendid word I felt that it would be absurd to try it any farther, So with a yawn I went my way to seek the welcome downy, and slept and dreamed till break of day of poltergeist and such and fay, and leprechaun and brownie. For years I've not been visited by any kind of sprite, yet still they echo in my head those parting words so kindly.
Echoes by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Anusha Iyer. Lady Clara Vere de Vere was 8 years old, she said. Every ringlet, lightly shaken, ran itself in golden thread. She took her little porringer. Of me she shall not win renown, for the baseness of its nature shall have strength to drag her down. Sisters and brothers, little maid, there stands the inspector at thy door. Like a dog, he hunts for boys who know not 2 and 2 are 4. Kind words are more than coronets, she said, and wondering looked at me. It is the dead unhappy.
A Sea Dirge by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org. There are certain things, as a spider, a ghost, the income tax, gout, an umbrella for 3, that I hate. But the thing that I hate the most is a thing they call the sea. Pour some salt water over the floor. Ugly, I'm sure you'll allow it to be. Suppose it extended a mile or more. That's very like the sea. Beat a dog till it howls outright. Cruel, but all very well for a spree. Suppose that he did so day and night. That would be like the sea. I had a vision of nursery maids. Tens of thousands passed by me, all leading children with wooden spades, and this was by the sea. Who invented those spades of wood? Who was it cut them out of the tree? None, I think, but an idiot could, or one that loved the sea. It is pleasant and dreamy, no doubt, to float, with thoughts as boundless and souls as free. But suppose you are very unwell in the boat, how do you like the sea? There is an insect that people avoid, whence is derived the verb to flee. Where have you been by it most annoyed? In lodgings by the sea. If you like your coffee with sand for dregs, a decided hint of salt in your tea, and a fishy taste in the very eggs, by all means choose the sea. And if with these dainties to drink and eat, you prefer not a vestige of grass or tree, and a chronic state of wet in your feet, then I recommend the sea. For I have friends who dwell by the coast. Pleasant friends they are to me. It is when I am with them I wonder most that anyone likes the sea. They take me a walk. Though tired and stiff, to climb the heights I madly agree, and after a tumble or so from the cliff they kindly suggest the sea. I try the rocks, and I think it cool that they laugh with such an excess of glee, as I heavily slip into every pool that skirts.
Ye Carpet Knight by Lewis Carroll. LibriVox.org. I have a horse, a right good horse, nor do I envy those who scour ye plain and heady course, till sudden on their nose they light with unexpected force. It is a horse of clothes. I have a saddle, sayest thou so, with stirrups night to boot? I say't not that, I answer no, it lacketh such, I woot. It is a mutton saddle, lo, part of ye fleecy brute. I have a bit, a right good bit, as shall be seen in time. Ye jaw of horse it will not fit, its use is more sublime. Fair sir, how deemest thou of it? Hiawatha's Photographing by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Noel Badrian. In an age of imitation, I can claim no special merit for this slight attempt at doing what is known to be so easy. Any fairly practised writer, with the slightest ear for rhythm, could compose for hours together in the easy-running metre of the Song of Hiawatha. Having, then, distinctly stated that I challenge no attention in the following little poem to its merely verbal jingle, I must beg the candidate reader to confine his criticism to its treatment of the subject. From his shoulder Hiawatha took the camera of rosewood, made of sliding, folding rosewood, neatly put it all together. In its case it lay compactly, folded into nearly nothing, but he opened out the hinges, pushed and pulled the joints and hinges, till it looked all squares and oblongs, like a complicated figure in the second book of Euclid. This he perched upon a tripod, crouched beneath its dusty cover, stretched his hand enforcing silence, said, "Be motionless, I beg you." Mystic, awful was the process. All the family in order sat before him for their pictures. Each in turn, as he was taken, volunteered his own suggestions, his ingenious suggestions. First the governor, the father, he suggested velvet curtains, looped about a massy pillar, and the corner of a table, of a rosewood dining table. He would hold a scroll of something, hold it firmly in his left hand. He would keep his right hand buried, like Napoleon, in his waistcoat. He would contemplate the distance with a look of pensive meaning, as of ducks that die in tempests. Grand, heroic was the notion, yet the picture failed entirely, failed because he moved a little, moved because he couldn't help it. Next his better half took courage. She would have her picture taken. She came dressed beyond description, dressed in jewels and in satin, far too gorgeous for an empress. Gracefully she sat down sideways, with a simper scarcely human, holding in her hand a bouquet, rather larger than a cabbage. All the while that she was sitting, still the lady chattered, like a monkey in the forest. "Am I sitting still?" she asked him. "Is my face enough in profile? Shall I hold the bouquet higher? Will it come into the picture?" And the picture failed completely. Next the son, the stunning Cantab. He suggested curves of beauty, curves pervading all his figure, which the eye might follow onward, till they centred in the breastpin, centred in the golden breastpin. He had learnt it all from Ruskin, author of The Stones of Venice, 7 Lamps of Architecture, Modern Painters, and some others. And perhaps he had not fully understood his author's meaning, but whatever was the reason, all was fruitless, as the picture ended in an utter failure. Next to him the eldest daughter, she suggested very little, only asked if he would take her with her look of passive beauty. Her idea of passive beauty was a squinting of the left eye, was a drooping of the right eye, was a smile that went up sideways to the corner of the nostrils. Hiawatha, when she asked him, took no notice of the question, looked as if he hadn't heard it, but when pointedly appealed to, smiled in his peculiar manner, coughed, and said it didn't matter, bit his lip and changed the subject, nor in this was he mistaken, as the picture failed completely. So in turn the other sisters. Last the youngest son was taken. Very rough and thick his hair was, very round and red his face was, very dusty was his jacket, very fidgety his manner, and his overbearing sisters called him names he disapproved of, called him Johnny, Daddy's darling, called him Jackie, scrubby schoolboy. And so awful was the picture. In comparison, the others seemed, to one's bewildered fancy, to have partially succeeded. Finally, my Hiawatha tumbled all the tribe together. Grouped is not the right expression, and, as happy chance would have it, did at last obtain a picture, where the faces all succeeded, each came out a perfect likeness. Then they joined, and all abused it, unrestrainedly abused it, as the worst and ugliest picture they could possibly have dreamt of, giving one such strange expressions, sullen, stupid, pert expressions. Really any one would take us, any one that did not know us, for the most unpleasant people. Hiawatha seemed to think so, seemed to think it not unlikely. All together rang their voices, angry, loud, discordant voices, as of dogs that howl in concert, as of cats that wail in chorus. But my Hiawatha's patience, his politeness and his patience, unaccountably had vanished, and he left that happy party. Neither did he leave them slowly, with the calm deliberation, the intense deliberation of a photographic artist, but he left them in a hurry, left them in a mighty hurry, stating that he would not stand it, stating in emphatic language what he'd be before he'd stand it. Hurriedly he packed his boxes, hurriedly the porter trundled on a barrow all his boxes, hurriedly he took his ticket, hurriedly the train received him.
Melancoletta by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Chase Capener. With saddest music all day long she soothed her secret sorrow. At night she sighed, I fear 'twas wrong such cheerful words to borrow. Dearest, a sweeter, sadder song I'll sing to thee tomorrow. I thanked her, but I could not say that I was glad to hear it. I left the house at break of day, and did not venture near it, till time, I hoped, had worn away her grief, for naught could cheer it. My dismal sister, couldst thou know the wretched home thou keepest, thy brother drowned in daily woe is thankful when thou sleepest, for if I laugh, however low, when thou art wake thou weepest. I took my sister t'other day, excuse the slang expression, to Sadler's Wells to see the play, in hopes the new impression might in her thoughts from grave to gay effect some slight digression. I asked 3 gay young dogs from town to join us in our folly, whose mirth I thought might serve to drown my sister's melancholy. the lively Jones, the sportive Brown, and Robinson the jolly. The maid announced the meals in tones that I myself had taught her, meant to allay my sister's moans like oil on troubled water. I rushed to Jones, the lively Jones, and begged him to escort her. Vainly he strove with ready wit to joke about the weather, to ventilate the last on dit, to quote the price of leather. She groaned, "Here I and sorrow sit, let us lament together." I urged, "You're wasting time, you know. Delay will spoil the venison. My heart is wasted with my woe. There is no rest in Venice on the Bridge of Sighs," she quoted low, from Byron and from Tennyson. I need not tell of soup and fish in solemn silence swallowed, the sobs that ushered in each dish and its departure followed, nor yet my suicidal wish to be the cheese I hollowed. Some desperate attempts were made to start a conversation. Madame the sportive Brown essayed, "Which kind of recreation, hunting or fishing, have you made your special occupation?" Her lips curved downwards instantly, as if of India rubber. "Hounds in full cry I like," said she. Oh, how I longed to snub her. "Of fish, a whale's the one for me. It is so full of blubber." The night's performance was King John. "It's dull," she wept, and so. A while I let her tears flow on. She said they soothed her woe so. At length the curtain rose upon Bombastes Furioso. In vain we roared, in vain we tried to rouse her into laughter. Her pensive glances wandered wide from orchestra to rafter. Tear upon tear
A Valentine by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Royce Rosewood. Sent to a friend who had complained that I was glad enough to see him when he came, but didn't seem to miss him if he stayed away. And cannot pleasures, while they last, be actual unless, when past, they leave us shuddering and aghast with anguish smarting? And cannot friends be firm and fast, and yet bear parting? And must I then at friendship's call calmly resign the little all, trifling, I grant, it is and small, I have of gladness, and lend my being to the thrall of gloom and sadness? And think you that I should be dumb and full dolorum omnium, excepting when you choose to come and share my dinner, at other times be sour and glum and daily thinner? Must he then only live to weep who proved his friendship true and deep? By day a lonely shadow creep, at night-time languish, oft-raising in his broken sleep the moan of anguish? The lover, if for certain days his fair one be denied his gaze, sinks not in grief and wild amaze, but, wiser wooer, he spends the time in writing lays, and posts them to her. And if the verse flow free and fast, till even the poet is aghast, a touching Valentine at last the post shall carry, when 13 days are gone and past of February. Farewell, dear friend, and when we meet, in desert waste or crowded street, perhaps before this week shall fleet, perhaps tomorrow.
The Three Voices by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Mary Escano. Walsall, West Midlands, England. The First Voice. He trilled a carol, fresh and free. He laughed aloud for very glee. There came a breeze from off the sea. It passed athwart the glooming flat. It fanned his forehead as he sat. It lightly bore away his hat. All to the feet of one who stood, like maid enchanted, in a wood, frowning as darkly as she could. With huge umbrella, lank and brown, unerringly she pinned it down, right through the centre of the crown. Then with an aspect cold and grim, regardless of its battered rim, she took it up and gave it him. A while like one in dreams he stood, then faltered forth his gratitude in words just short of being rude. For it had lost its shape and shine, and it had cost him 4 and 9, and he was going out to dine. To dine, she sneered in acid tone, to bend thy being to a bone, clothed in a radiance not its own. The teardrop trickled to his chin. There was meaning in her grin that made him feel on fire within. Term it not radiance, said he, 'tis solid nutriment to me. Dinner is dinner, tea is tea. And she, yea so, yet wherefore cease? Let thy scant knowledge find increase. Say, men are men, and geese are geese. He moaned. He knew not what to say. The thought that I could get away strove with the thought, but I must stay. To dine, she shrieked in dragon wrath, to swallow wines all foam and froth, to simper at a tablecloth. Say, can thy noble spirit stoop to join the gormandizing troop who find a solace in the soup? Canst thou desire, or pie or puff? Thy well-bred manners were enough, without such gross material stuff. Yet well-bred men, he faintly said, are not unwilling to be fed, nor are they well without the bread. Her visage scorched him ere she spoke. There are, she said, a kind of folk who have no horror of a joke. Such wretches live, they take their share of common earth and common air. We come across them here and there. We grant them there is no escape. A sort of semi-human shape, suggestive of the man-like ape. In all such theories, said he, one fixed exception there must be. That is, the present company. Baffled, she gave a wolfish bark. He, aiming blindly in the dark, with random shaft, had pierced the mark. She felt that her defeat was plain, yet madly strove with might and main to get the upper hand again. Fixing her eyes upon the beach, as though unconscious of his speech, she said, each gives to more than each. He could not answer yea or nay. He faltered, gifts may pass away, yet knew not what he meant to say. If that be so, she straight replied, each heart with each doth coincide. What boots it? For the world is wide. The world is but a thought, said he. The vast, unfathomable sea is but a notion unto me. And darkly fell her answer dread upon his unresisting head, like 100 weight of lead. The good and great must ever shun, that reckless and abandoned one, who stoops to perpetrate a pun. The man that smokes, that reads the Times, that goes to Christmas pantomimes is capable of any crimes. He felt it was his turn to speak, and with a shamed and crimson cheek, moaned, "This is harder than Bezique." When she asked him, "Wherefore so?" he felt his very whiskers glow, and frankly owned, "I do not know." While, like broad waves of golden grain, on sunlit hues, uncloistered pane, his colour came and went again. Pitying his obvious distress, yet with a tinge of bitterness, she said, "The more exceeds the less." "A truth of such undoubted weight," he urged, "and so extreme in date, it was superfluous to state." Roused into sudden passion she, in tone of cold malignity, "To others, yea, but not to thee." But when she saw him quail and quake, and when he urged, "For pity's sake," once more in gentle tone she spake, "Thought in the mind doth still abide, that is, by intellect supplied, and within that idea doth hide. And he that yearns the truth to know, still further inwardly may go, and find idea from notion flow. And thus the chain that sages sought is to a glorious circle wrought, for notion hath its source in thought. So pass they on with even pace, yet gradually one might trace a shadow growing on his face. A second voice. They walked beside the wave-worn beach. Her tongue was very apt to teach, and now and then he did beseech. She would abate her dulcet tone, because the talk was all her own, and he was dull as any drone. She urged, "No cheese is made of chalk," and ceaseless flowed her dreary talk, tuned to the footfall of a walk. Her voice was very full and rich, and when at length she asked him which, it mounted to its highest pitch. He a bewildered answer gave, drowned in the sullen, moaning wave, lost in the echoes of the cave. He answered her, he knew not what, like shaft from bow at random shot. He spoke, but she regarded not. She waited not for his reply, but with a downward leaden eye went on as if he were not by. Sound argument and great defence, strange questions raised on why and whence, and wildly tangled the evidence. When he, with racked and whirling brain, feebly implored her to explain, she simply said it all again. Wrenched with an agony intense, he spake, neglecting sound and sense, and careless of all consequence. Mind, I believe, is essence, and abstract, that is, an accident, which we, that is to say, I meant, when, with quick breath and cheeks all flushed, at length his speech was somewhat hushed. She looked at him, and he was crushed. It needed not her calm reply. She fixed him with a stony eye, and he could neither fight nor fly. while she dissected, word by word, his speech, half guessed at and half heard, as might a cat a little bird. Then, having wholly overthrown his views and stripped them to the bone, proceeded to unfold her own. Shall man be man, and shall he miss of other thoughts no thought but this, harmonious dues of sober bliss? What boots it? Shall his fevered eye through towering nothingness descry the grisly phantom hurry by, and hear dumb shrieks that fill the air, see mouths that gape and eyes that stare and redden in the dusty glare, the meadows breathing amber light, the darkness toppling from the height, the feathery train of granite night? Shall he, grown grey among his peers, through the thick curtain of his tears, catch glimpses of his early years, and hear the sounds he knew of yore? Old shufflings on the sanded floor, old knuckles tapping at the door? Yet still before him as he flies, one pallid form shall ever rise, embodying forth in glassy eyes the vision of a vanished good, low peering through the tangled wood, shall freeze the current of his blood. Still from each fact, with skill uncouth, and savage rapture, like a tooth, she wrenched some slow, reluctant truth, till, like a silent water-mill, when summer rains have dried the rill, she reached a full stop and was still. Dead calm succeeded to the fuss, as when the loaded omnibus has reached the railway terminus. When, for the tumult of the street, is heard the engine's stifled beat, the velvet tread of porters' feet. With glance that ever sought the ground, she moved her lips without the sound, and every now and then she frowned. He gazed upon the silent sea, and enjoyed in its tranquillity, and in that silence dead but she. To muse a little space did seem, then, like the echo of a dream, harked back upon her threadbare theme. Still an attractive ear he lent, but could not fathom what she meant. She was not deep nor eloquent. He marked the ripple on the sand, the even swaying of her hand was all that he could understand. He saw in dreams a drawing room, where 13 wretches sat in gloom, waiting, he thought he knew for whom. He saw them dropping here and there, each feebly huddled on a chair, in attitudes of blank despair. Oysters were not more mute than they, for all their brains were pumped away, and they had nothing more to say, save one who groaned, 3 hours are gone, who shrieked, "We'll wait no longer, John. Tell them to set the dinner on." The visions passed, the ghosts were fled. He saw once more that woman dread. He heard once more the words she said. He left her, and he turned aside. He sat and watched the coming tide across the shores so newly dried. He wondered at the waters clear, the breeze that whispered in his ear, the billows heaving far and near, and why he had so long preferred to hang upon her every word. In truth, he said, it was absurd. The third voice. Not long this transport held its place. Within a little moment's space, quick tears were running down his face. His heart stood still, aghast with fear. A wordless voice, not far nor near, he seemed to hear, and not to hear. Tears kindle not the doubtful spark. If so, why not of this remark? The bearings are profoundly dark. Her speech, he said, hath caused us pain. Easier I count it to explain the jargon of the howling main, or stretch beside some babbling brook to con with inexpressive look an unintelligible book. Low spake the voice within his head, in words imagined more than said, soundless as ghosts' intended tread. If thou art duller than before, why critic'st thou the voice of law? Why not endure, expecting more? Rather than that, he groaned aghast, I'd writhe in depths of cavern vast some loathly vampire's rich repast. 'Twere hard, it answered, themes immense, to coop within the narrow fence that rings thy scant intelligence. Not so, he urged, nor once alone, but there was something in her tone that chilled me to the very bone. Her style was anything but clear, and most unpleasantly severe. Her epithets were very queer, and yet so grand were her replies, I could not choose but deem her wise. I did not dare to criticize. Nor did I leave her till she went so deep in tangled argument that all my powers of thought were spent. A little whisper inly slid, yet truth is truth, you know you did. A little wink beneath the lid, and sickened with excess of dread, prone to the dust he bent his head, and lay like one 3/4 dead. The whisper left him like a breeze, lost in the depths of leafy trees, left him by no means at his ease. Once more he weltered in despair, with hands through denser matted hair, more tightly clenched than they were, when, bathed in dawn of living red, majestic frowned the mountain head. Tell me my fault, was all he said, when at high noon the blazing sky scorched in his head each haggard eye. Then keenest rose his weary cry, and when at eve The unpitying sun smiled grimly on the solemn bun. "Alack," he sighed, "what have I done?" But saddest, darkest was the sight when the cold grasp of leaden night dashed him to earth and held him tight. Tortured, unaided, and alone, thunders were silence to his groan, bagpipe sweet music to its tone. What, ever thus, in dismal round, shall pain and mystery profound pursue me like a sleepless hound, with crimson dashed and eager jaws, me, still in ignorance of the cause, unknowing what I broke of laws? The whisper to his ear did seem like echoed flow of silent stream, or shadow of forgotten dream. The whisper trembling in the wind, her fate with thine was intertwined, so spake it in his inner mind. Each orbed on each a baleful star, each proved the other's blight and bar. Each unto each were best most far, yea, each to each was worse than foe. Thou scared dullard, gibbering low, and she, an
Tema con variazione by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Noel Badrian. Why is it that poetry has never yet been subjected to that process of dilution which has proved so advantageous to her sister art, music? The diluter gives us first a few notes of some well-known air, then a dozen bars of his own, then a few more notes of the air, and so on alternately, thus saving the listener, if not from all risk of recognizing the melody at all, at least from the too exciting transports which it might produce in a more concentrated form. The process is termed setting by composers, and anyone that has ever experienced the emotion of being unexpectedly set down in a heap of mortar will recognize the truthfulness of this happy phrase. For truly, just as the genuine epicure lingers lovingly over a morsel of supreme venison, whose every fibre seems to murmur "Excelsior," yet swallows, ere returning to the toothsome dainty, great mouthfuls of oatmeal porridge and winkles. And just as the perfect connoisseur in claret permits himself but one delicate sip, and then tosses off a pint or more of boarding-school beer, so also. I never loved a dear gazelle, nor anything that cost me much. High prices profit those who sell, but why should I be fond of such? To glad me with his soft black eye, my son comes trotting home from school. He's had a fight, but can't tell me why. He always was a little fool. But when he came to know me well, he kicked me out, her testy sire, and when I stained my hair, that Belle might note the change and thus admire, and love me. It was sure to dye a muddy green or staring blue, whilst one might trace with half an eye the still
A Game of Fives by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Diane Ala-Ilima on September 24, 2016. A Game of Fives. 5 little girls of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, rolling on the hearthrug full of tricks and fun. 5 rosy girls in years from 10 to 6, sitting down to lessons, no more time for tricks. 5 growing girls from 15 to 11, music, drawing, languages, and food enough for 7. 5 winsome girls from 20 to 16, each young man that calls I say, now tell me which you mean. 5 dashing girls, the youngest 21, but if nobody proposes, what is there to be done? 5 showy girls, but 30 is an age when girls may be engaging, but they somehow don't engage. 5 dressy girls of 31 or more, so gracious to the shy young men they snubbed so much before. 5 passé girls, their age, well, never mind. We jog along together like the rest of humankind. But the quondam careless bachelor begins to think he knows
Poeta fit non nascitur, by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Tavarish. How shall I be a poet? How shall I write and rhyme? You told me once the very wish partook of the sublime. Then tell me how, don't put me off with your another time. The old man smiled to see him, to hear his sudden sally. He liked the lad to speak his mind enthusiastically, and thought there's no humdrum in him, nor any shilly-shally. And would you be a poet before you went to school? Ah, well, I hardly thought you so absolute a fool. First learn to be spasmodic, a very simple rule. For first you write a sentence, and then you chop it small, then mix the bits and sort them out, just as they chance to fall. The order of the phrases makes no difference at all. Then if you'd be impressive, remember what I say, that abstract qualities begin with capitals alway. The true, the good, the beautiful, those are the things that pay. Next, when you are describing a shape or sound or tint, don't state the matter plainly, but put it in a hint, and learn to look at all things with a sort of mental squint. For instance, if I wish, sir, of mutton pies to tell, should I say dreams of fleecy flocks pent in a wheaten cell? Why, yes, the old man said, that phrase would answer very well. Then fourthly, there are epithets that suit with any word, as well as Harvey's Reading sauce with fish or flesh or bird. Of these, wild, lonely, weary, strange, are much to be preferred. And will it do to take them in a lump, as the wild man went his weary way to a strange and lonely pump? Nay, nay, you must not hastily to such conclusions jump. Such epithets like pepper give zest to what you write, and if you strew them sparely, they whet the appetite, but if you lay them on too thick, you spoil the matter quite. Last, as to the arrangement, your reader, you should know him, must take what information he can get, and look for no immature disclosure of the drift and purpose of your poem. Therefore, to test his patience, how much he can endure, mention no places, names, or dates, and evermore be sure throughout the poem to be found consistently obscure. First fix upon the limit to which it shall extend, then fill it up with padding, beg some of any friend. Your great sensation stanza you place towards the end, And what is the sensation, grandfather, tell me, pray? I think I never heard the word so used before today. Be kind enough to mention one exemple gratiae. And the old man, looking sadly across the garden lawn, where here and there a dewdrop yet glittered in the dawn, said, "Go to the Adelphi and see the Colin born. The word is due to Boucicault. The theory is his, where life becomes a spasm and history a whiz. If that is not sensation, I don't know what it is. Now try your hand ere fancy have lost its present glow." "And then," his grandson added, "we'll publish it, you know, green cloth, gold-lettered, at the back in 12mo." Then proudly smiled that old man to see the eager lad rush madly for his pen and ink and for his blotting pad. But when he thought of publishing,
The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. Preface. If, and the thing is wildly possible, the charge of writing nonsense were ever brought against the author of this brief but instructive poem, it would be based, I feel convinced, on the line, "Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes." In view of this painful possibility, I will not, as I might, appeal indignantly to my other writings as a proof that I am incapable of such a deed. I will not, as I might, point to the strong moral purpose of this poem itself, to the arithmetical principles so cautiously inculcated in it, or to its noble teachings in natural history. I will take the more prosaic course of simply explaining how it happened. The bellman, who was almost morbidly sensitive about appearances, used to have the bowsprit unshipped once or twice a week to be revarnished, and it more than once happened, when the time came for replacing it, that no one on board could remember which end of the ship it belonged to. They knew it was not of the slightest use to appeal to the bellman about it. He would only refer to his naval code, and read out in pathetic tones Admiralty instructions, which none of them had ever been able to understand, so it generally ended in its being fastened on anyhow, across the rudder. The helmsman, note, this office was usually undertaken by the boots, who found in it a refuge from the baker's constant complaints about the insufficient blacking of his 3 pair of boots. End note. The helmsman used to stand by with tears in his eyes. He knew it was all wrong, but, alas, Rule 42 of the Code, "No one shall speak to the man at the helm," had been completed by the bellman himself with the words, "And the man at the helm shall speak to no one." So remonstrance was impossible, and no steering could be done till the next varnishing day. During these bewildering intervals the ship usually sailed backwards. As this poem is to some extent connected with the lay of the Jabberwock, let me take this opportunity of answering a question that has often been asked me: how to pronounce slithy toves. The I in slithy is long, as in writhe, and toves is pronounced so as to rhyme with groves. Again, the first O in borogoves is pronounced like the O in borrow. I have heard people try to give it the sound of the O in worry. Such is human perversity. This also seems a fitting occasion to notice the other hard words in that poem. Humpty Dumpty's theory of 2 meanings packed into one word like a portmanteau seems to me the right explanation for all. For instance, take the 2 words fuming and furious. Make up your mind that you will say both words, but leave it unsettled which you will say first. Now open your mouth and speak. If your thoughts incline ever so little towards fuming, you will say fuming furious. If they turn by even a hair's breadth towards furious, you will say furious fuming. But if you have that rarest of gifts, a perfectly balanced mind, you will say frumious. Supposing that when Pistol uttered the well-known words, "Under which king, Bezonian, speak or die," Justice Shallow had felt certain that it was either William or Richard, but had not been able to settle which, so that he could not possibly say either name before the other, can it be doubted that, rather than die, he would have gasped out, "Rilchium"? Fit the First. The Landing. "Just the place for a Snark," the bellman cried, as he landed his crew with care, supporting each man on the top of the tide by a finger entwined in his hair. "Just the place for a Snark. I have said it twice. That alone should encourage the crew. Just the place for a Snark. I have said it thrice. What I tell you 3 times is true." The crew was complete. It included a boots, a maker of bonnets and hoods, a barrister brought to arrange their disputes, and a broker to value their goods. A billiard marker, whose skill was immense, might perhaps have won more than his share, but a banker, engaged at enormous expense, had the whole of their cash in his care. There was also a beaver, that paced on the deck, or would sit making lace in the bow, and had often, the bellman said, saved them from wreck, though none of the sailors knew how. There was one who was famed for the number of things he forgot when he entered the ship: his umbrella, his watch, all his jewels and rings, and the clothes he had bought for the trip. He had 42 boxes, all carefully packed, with his name painted clearly on each, but since he omitted to mention the fact, they were all left behind on the beach. The loss of his clothes hardly mattered, because he had 7 coats on when he came, with 3 pair of boots, but the worst of it was he had wholly forgotten his name. He would answer to "Hi," or to any loud cry, such as "Fry me," or "Fritter my wig," to "What you may call 'em," or "What was his name," but especially "Thingamajig," while for those who preferred a more forcible word, he had different names from these. His intimate friends called him Candle Ends, and his enemies Toasted Cheese. "His form is ungainly, his intellect small," so the bellman would often remark, "but his courage is perfect, and that, after all, is the thing that one needs with a Snark." He would joke with hyenas, returning their stare with an impudent whack of the head, and he once went a walk, paw in paw, with a bear, "just to keep up its spirits," he said. He came as a baker, but owned, when too late, and it drove the poor bellman half mad, he could only bake bride cake, for which, I may state, no materials were to be had. The last of the crew needs especial remark, though he looked an incredible dunce. He had just one idea, but that one being Snark, the good bellman engaged him at once. He came as a butcher, but gravely declared, when the ship had been sailing a week, he could only kill beavers. The bellman looked scared, and was almost too frightened to speak. But at length he explained in a tremulous tone there was only one beaver on board, and that was a tame one he had of his own, whose death would be deeply deplored. The beaver, who happened to hear the remark, protested with tears in its eyes that not even the rapture of hunting the Snark could atone for that dismal surprise. It strongly advised that the butcher should be conveyed in a separate ship, but the bellman declared that would never agree with the plans he had made for the trip. Navigation was always a difficult art, though, with only one ship and one bell, and he feared he must really decline, for his part, undertaking another as well. The beaver's best course was, no doubt, to procure a second-hand dagger-proof coat, so the baker advised it, and next to insure its life in some office of note. This the banker suggested, and offered for hire, on moderate terms, or for sale, 2 excellent policies, one against fire and one against damage from hail. Yet still, ever after that sorrowful day, whenever the butcher was by, the beaver kept looking the opposite way, and appeared The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the Second, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Bellman's Speech. The bellman himself they all praised to the skies. Such a carriage, such ease and such grace, such solemnity too. One could see he was wise the moment one looked in his face. He had bought a large map representing the sea, without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. "What's the good of Mercator's North Poles and Equators, tropics, zones, and meridian lines?" So the bellman would cry, and the crew would reply, "They are merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes, with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank." So the crew would protest, "that he's brought us the best, a perfect and absolute blank." This was charming, no doubt, but they shortly found out that the captain they trusted so well had only one notion for crossing the ocean, and that was to tingle his bell. He was thoughtful and grave, but the orders he gave were enough to bewilder a crew. When he cried, "Steer to starboard, but keep her head larboard," what on earth was the helmsman to do? Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes, a thing, as the bellman remarked, that frequently happens in tropical climes, when a vessel is, so to speak, snarked. But the principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped, at least, when the wind blew due east, that the ship would not travel due west. But the danger was past. They had landed at last, with their boxes, portmanteaus, and bags. Yet at first sight the crew was not pleased with the view, which consisted of chasms and crags. The bellman perceived that their spirits were low, and repeated in musical tone some jokes he had kept for a season of woe, but the crew would do nothing but groan. He served out some grog with a liberal hand, and bade them sit down on the beach, and they could not but own that their captain looked grand as he stood and delivered his speech. "Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears." They were all of them fond of quotations, so they drank to his health, and they gave him 3 cheers, while he served out additional rations. "We have sailed many months, we have sailed many weeks, 4 weeks to the month, you may mark, but never as yet, 'tis your captain who speaks, have we caught the least glimpse of a snark. We have sailed many weeks, we have sailed many days, 7 days to the week, I allow, but a snark, on the which we might lovingly gaze, we have never beheld till now. Come, listen, my men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks by which you may know, wheresoever you go, the warranted genuine snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meagre and hollow, but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavour of will-o'-the-wisp. Its habit of getting up late, you'll agree that it carries too far, when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea and dines on the following day. The third is its slowness in taking a jest. Should you happen to venture on one, it will sigh like a thing that is deeply distressed, and it always looks grave at a pun. The fourth is its fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about, and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular batch, distinguishing those that have feathers and bite from those that have whiskers and scratch. For although common snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it my duty to say some are boojums. The bellman broke off in alarm. The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the Third, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Baker's Tale. They roused him with muffins, they roused him with ice, they roused him with mustard and cress, they roused him with jam and judicious advice, they set him conundrums to guess. When at length he sat up and was able to speak, his sad story he offered to tell, and the bellman cried, "Silence! Not even a shriek!" and excitedly tingled his bell. There was silence supreme, not a shriek, not a scream, scarcely even a howl or a groan, as the man they called Ho told his story of woe in an antediluvian tone. My father and mother were honest, though poor. Skip all that, cried the bellman in haste. If it once becomes dark, there's no chance of a snark. We have hardly a minute to waste. I skip 40 years, said the baker in tears, and proceed without further remark to the day when you took me aboard of your ship to help you in hunting the snark. A dear uncle of mine, after whom I was named, remarked when I bade him farewell. "Oh, skip your dear uncle!" the bellman exclaimed, as he angrily tingled his bell. He remarked to me then, said that mildest of men, "If your snark be a snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means. You may serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. You may seek it with thimbles, and seek it with care. You may hunt it with forks and hope. You may threaten its life with a railway share. You may charm it with smiles and soap." "That's exactly the method," the bellman bold in a hasty parenthesis cried. "That's exactly the way I have always been told that the capture of snarks should be tried." But, oh, beamish nephew, beware of the day if your snark be a boojum, for then you will softly and suddenly vanish away, and never be met with again. It is this that oppresses my soul when I think of my uncle's last words, and my heart is like nothing so much as a bowl brimming over with quivering curds. It is this. We have had that before, the bellman indignantly said, and the baker replied, "Let me say it once more. It is this that I dread. I engage with the snark every night after dark, in a dreamy, delirious fight. I serve it with greens in those shadowy scenes, and I use it for striking a light. But if ever I meet with a boojum, that day, in a moment, of this I am sure, I shall softly and suddenly vanish away, and the notion The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the Fourth, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Hunting. The bellman looked uffish and wrinkled his brow.
If only you'd spoken before. It's excessively awkward to mention it now, with the Snark, so to speak, at the door. We should all of us grieve, as you well may believe, if you never were met with again. But surely, my man, when the voyage began, you might have suggested it then. It's excessively awkward to mention it now, as I think I've already remarked.
And the man they called High replied with a sigh, I informed you the day we embarked. You may charge me with murder or want of sense. We are all of us weak at times, but the slightest approach to a false pretence was never among my crimes. I said it in Hebrew, I said it in Dutch, I said it in German and Greek, but I wholly forgot, and it vexes me much, that English is what you speak.
'Tis a pitiful tale,
said the bellman, whose face had grown longer at every word.
But now that you've stated the whole of your case, more debate would be simply absurd. The rest of my speech,
he explained to his men,
you shall hear when I've leisure to speak it. But the Snark is at hand, let me tell you again. 'Tis your glorious duty to seek it with thimbles, to seek it with care, to pursue it with forks and hope, to threaten its life with a railway share, to charm it with smiles and soap. For the Snark's a peculiar creature that won't be caught in a commonplace way. Do all that you know and try all that you don't. Not a chance must be wasted today. For England expects... I forbear to proceed. 'Tis a maxim tremendous but trite, and you'd best be unpacking the thing that you need to rig yourselves out for the fight.
Then the banker endorsed a blank cheque, which he crossed, and changed his loose silver for notes. The baker with care combed his whiskers and hair, and shook the dust out of his coats. The boots and the broker were sharpening a spade, each working the grindstone in turn. But the beaver went on making lace, and displayed no interest in the concern, though the barrister tried to appeal to its pride, and vainly proceeded to cite a number of cases in which making laces had been proved an infringement of right. The maker of bonnets ferociously planned a novel arrangement of bows, while the billiard marker, with quivering hand, was chalking the tip of his nose. But the butcher turned nervous, and dressed himself fine with yellow kid gloves and a ruff, said he felt it exactly like going to dine, which the bellman declared was all stuff.
Introduce me, now there's a good fellow,
he said,
if we happen to meet it together.
And the bellman, sagaciously nodding his head, said,
That must depend on the weather.
The beaver went simply galumphing about at seeing the butcher so shy, and even the baker, though stupid and stout, made an effort to wink with one eye.
Be a man,
cried the bellman in wrath, as he heard the butcher beginning to sob.
Should we meet with a jub-jub, that desperate bird?
The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the Fifth, by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Beaver's Lesson. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope, they threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. Then the butcher contrived an ingenious plan for making a separate sally, and had fixed on a spot unfrequented by man, a dismal and desolate valley. But the very same plan to the beaver occurred. It had chosen the very same place, yet neither betrayed by a sign or a word the disgust that appeared in his face. Each thought he was thinking of nothing but Snark and the glorious work of the day, and each tried to pretend that he did not remark that the other was going that way. But the valley grew narrow and narrower still, and the evening got darker and colder, till merely from nervousness, not from goodwill, they marched along shoulder to shoulder. Then a scream, shrill and high, rent the shuddering sky, and they knew that some danger was near. The beaver turned pale to the tip of its tail, and even the butcher felt queer. He thought of his childhood, left far, far behind, that blissful and innocent state. The sound so exactly recalled to his mind a pencil that squeaks on a slate.
"'Tis the voice of the Jub-Jub,"
he suddenly cried, this man that they used to call Dunce.
"As the bellman would tell you,"
he added with pride.
"I have uttered that sentiment once. 'Tis the note of the Jub-Jub. Keep count, I entreat. You will find I have told it you twice. 'Tis the song of the Jub-Jub. The proof is complete, if only I've stated it thrice."
The beaver had counted with scrupulous care, attending to every word, but it fairly lost heart and outgrabe in despair when the third repetition occurred. It felt that in spite of all possible pains it had somehow contrived to lose count, and the only thing now was to rack its poor brains by reckoning up the amount.
2 added to 1, if that could but be done,
it said, with one's fingers and thumbs, recollecting with tears how in earlier years it had taken no pains with its sums.
"The thing can be done,"
said the butcher.
"I think. The thing must be done, I am sure. The thing shall be done. Bring me paper and ink, the best there is time to procure."
The beaver brought paper, portfolio, pens, and ink in unfailing supplies, while strange creepy creatures came out of their dens and watched them with wondering eyes. So engrossed was the butcher, he heeded them not, as he wrote with a pen in each hand, and explained all the while in a popular style which the beaver could well understand.
"Taking 3 as the subject to reason about, a convenient number to state, we add 7 and 10, and then multiply out by 1000 diminished by 8. The result we proceed to divide, as you see, by 990 and 2. Then subtract 17, and the answer must be exactly and perfectly true. The method employed I would gladly explain while I have it so clear in my head, if I had but the time, and you had but the brain, but much yet remains to be said. In one moment I've seen what has hitherto been enveloped in absolute mystery, and without extra charge I will give you at large a lesson in natural history."
In his genial way he proceeded to say, forgetting all laws of propriety, and that giving instruction without introduction would have caused quite a thrill in society.
"As to temper, the Jub-Jub's a desperate bird, since it lives in perpetual passion. Its taste in costume is entirely absurd. It is ages ahead of the fashion. But it knows any friend it has met once before. It will never look at a bribe, and in charity meetings it stands at the door and collects, though it does not subscribe. Its flavour when cooked is more exquisite far than mutton or oysters or eggs. Some think it keeps best in an ivory jar, and some in mahogany kegs. You boil it in sawdust, you salt it in glue, you condense it with locusts and tape, still keeping one principal object in view, to preserve its symmetrical shape."
The butcher would gladly have talked till next day, but he felt that the lesson must end, and he wept with delight in attempting to say he considered the beaver his friend, while the beaver confessed with affectionate looks, more eloquent even than tears, It had learned in 10 minutes far more than all books would have taught it in 70 years. They returned hand in hand, and the bellman, unmanned for a moment with noble emotion, said, "This amply repays all the wearisome days we have spent on the billowy ocean." Such friends as the beaver and butcher became have seldom, if ever, been known. In winter or summer 'twas always the same. You could never meet either alone. And when quarrels arose, as one frequently finds quarrels will, spite of every endeavour, the song of the Jubjub recurred to their minds. The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the 6th, by Lewis Carroll. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Barrister's Dream. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope, they threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. But the barrister, weary of proving in vain that the beaver's lace-making was wrong, fell asleep, and in dreams saw the creature quite plain that his fancy had dwelt on so long. He dreamed that he stood in a shadowy court, where the Snark, with a glass in its eye, dressed in gown, bands, and wig, was defending a pig on the charge of deserting its sty. The witnesses proved without error or flaw that the sty was deserted when found, and the judge kept explaining the state of the law in a soft undercurrent of sound. The indictment had never been clearly expressed, and it seemed that the Snark had begun and had spoken 3 hours before anyone guessed what the pig was supposed to have done. The jury had each formed a different view long before the indictment was read, and they all spoke at once, so that none of them knew one word that the others had said. "You must know," said the judge, but the Snark exclaimed, "Fudge! That statute is obsolete quite. Let me tell you, my friends, the whole question depends on an ancient manorial right. In the manner of treason, the pig would appear to have aided, but scarcely abetted. While the charge of insolvency fails, it is clear, if you grant the plea, never indebted. The fact of desertion I will not dispute, but its guilt, as I trust, is removed, so far as relates to the costs of this suit, by the alibi which has been proved. My poor client's fate now depends on your votes." Here the speaker sat down in his place, and directed the judge to refer to his notes, and briefly to sum up the case. But the judge said he never had summed up before, so the Snark undertook it instead, and summed it so well that it came to far more than the witnesses ever had said. When the verdict was called for, the jury declined, as the word was so puzzling to spell. But they ventured to hope that the Snark wouldn't mind undertaking that duty as well. So the Snark found the verdict, although, as it owned, it was spent with the toils of the day. When it said the word "Guilty," the jury all groaned, and some of them fainted away. Then the Snark pronounced sentence, the judge being quite too nervous to utter a word. When it rose to its feet, there was silence like night, and the fall of a pin might be heard. "Transportation for life," was the sentence it gave, "and then to be fined £40. The jury all cheered, though the judge said he feared that the phrase was not legally sound. But their wild exultation was suddenly checked, when the jailer informed them with tears such a sentence would have not the slightest effect, as the pig had been dead for some years. The judge left the court looking deeply disgusted, but the Snark, though a little aghast, as the lawyer to whom the defence was entrusted went bellowing on to the last. Thus the barrister dreamed, while the bellowing seemed to grow every moment more clear, till he woke to the knell of a furious bell, which The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the 7th, by Lewis Carroll. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Banker's Fate. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope, they threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. And the banker, inspired with a courage so new it was matter for general remark, rushed madly ahead, and was lost to their view in his zeal to discover the Snark. But while he was seeking with thimbles and care, a Bandersnatch swiftly drew nigh, and grabbed at the banker, who shrieked in despair, for he knew it was useless to fly. He offered large discount, he offered a cheque, drawn to bearer, for £7.10. But the Bandersnatch merely extended its neck, and grabbed at the banker again, without rest or pause, while those frumious jaws went savagely snapping around. He skipped and he hopped, and he floundered and flopped, till fainting he fell to the ground. The Bandersnatch fled as the others appeared, led on by that fear-stricken yell, and the bellman remarked, "It is just as I feared," and solemnly tolled on his bell. He was black in the face, and they scarcely could trace the least likeness to what he had been, while so great was his fright that his waistcoat turned white, a wonderful thing to be seen. To the horror of all who were present that day, he uprose in full evening dress, and with senseless grimaces endeavoured to say what his tongue could no longer express. Down he sank in a chair, ran his hands through his hair, and chanted in mimsiest tones words whose utter inanity proved his insanity, while he rattled a couple of bones. "Leave him here to his fate, it is getting so late," the bellman exclaimed in a fright. "We have lost half a day." The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, Fit the 8th, by Lewis Carroll. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Peter Yearsley. The Vanishing. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope, they threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. They shuddered to think that the chase might fail, and the beaver, excited at last, went bounding along on the tip of its tail, for the daylight was nearly past. "There is Thingumbob shouting," the bellman said. "He is waving his hands, he is wagging his head. He has certainly found a Snark." They gazed in delight, while the butcher exclaimed, "He was always a desperate wag." They beheld him, their baker, their hero unnamed, on the top of a neighbouring crag, erect and sublime for one moment of time. In the next, that wild figure they saw, as if stung by a spasm, plunge into a chasm, while they waited and listened in awe. "It's a Snark," was the sound that first came to their ears, and seemed almost too good to be true. Then followed a torrent of laughter and cheers, then the ominous words, "It's a boo," then silence. Some fancied they heard in the air a weary and wandering sigh that sounded like jum, but the others declare it was only a breeze that went by. They hunted till darkness came on, but they found not a button or feather or mark by which they could tell that they stood on the ground where the baker had met with the Snark. In the midst of the word he was trying to say, in the midst of his laughter and glee, he had softly and suddenly vanished away, for the Snark was a boojum, you see.
Sighs and Tears by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Tavarish. When on the sandy shore I sit beside the salt sea wave, and fall into a weeping fit because I dare not shave, a little whisper at my ear enquires the reason of my fear. I answer, if that ruffian Jones should recognize me here, he'd bellow out my name in tones offensive to the ear. He chaffs me so on being stout, a thing that always puts me out. Ah me, I see him on the cliff. Farewell, farewell to hope, if he should look this way, and if he's got his telescope. To whatsoever place I flee, my odious rival follows me. For every night and everywhere I meet him out at dinner, and when I've found some charming fair and vowed to die or win her, the wretch, he's thin and I am stout, is sure to come and cut me out. The girls, just like them, all agree to praise J. Jones, Esquire. I ask them what on earth they see about him to admire. They cry, he is so sleek and slim, it's quite a treat to look at him. They vanish in tobacco smoke, those visionary maids. I feel a sharp and sudden poke between the shoulder blades. Why, Brown, my boy, you're growing stout. I told you he would find me out. My growth is not your business, sir. No more it is, my boy. But if it's yours, as I infer, why, Brown, I give you joy. A man whose business prospers so is just the sort of man to know. It's hardly safe, though, talking here. I'd best get out of reach. For such a weight as yours, I fear, must shortly sink the beach. Insult me thus because I'm stout, I vow I'll
Atalanta in Camden Town by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Ian King. Aye, 'twas here, on this spot, in that summer of yore, Atalanta did not vote my presence a bore, nor reply to my tenderest talk. She had heard all that nonsense before. She'd the brooch I had bought, and the necklace and sash on, and her heart, as I thought, was alive to my passion, and she'd done up her hair in the style that the Empress had brought into fashion. I had been to the play with my pearl of a Peri, but for all I could say, she declared she was weary, that the place was so crowded and hot, and she couldn't abide that Dundreary. Then I thought, 'tis for me that she whines and she whimpers, and it soothed me to see those sensational simpers. And I said, this is scrumptious, a phrase I had learned from the Devonshire shrimpers. And I vowed, 'twill be said, I'm a fortunate fellow, when the breakfast is spread, when the topers are mellow, when the foam of the bride cake is white, and the fierce orange blossoms are yellow. Oh, that languishing yawn, oh, those eloquent eyes, I was drunk with the dawn of a splendid surmise. I was stung by a look, I was slain by a tear, by a tempest of sighs. And I whispered, 'tis time, is not love at its deepest? Shall we squander life's prime, while thou waitest and weepest? Let us settle it, licence or bans, though undoubtedly bans are the cheapest. Ah, my hero, said I, let me be thy Leander. But I lost her reply, something ending with gander, for the omnibus rattled so loud.
The Lang Curtain by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Caro. The lady stood at her lattice high, wi' her doggie at her feet. Through the lattice she can spy the passers in the street. There's one that standeth at the door, and tirleth at the pin. Now speak and say, my popinjay, if I shall let him in. Then up and spake the popinjay that flew aboon her head. Gae, let him in that tirls the pin, he cometh thee to wed. O when he cam the parlour in, a woeful man was he. And dinna ye ken your lover again, sae well that loveth thee? And how would I ken ye loved me, sir, that have been sae lang away? And how would I ken ye loved me, sir, ye never telled me sae? Said, Lady dear, and the salt, salt tear cam rinnin doon his cheek. I have sent thee tokens of my love this many and many a week. O didna ye get the rings, lady, the rings o' the good, sae fine? I wot that I have sent to thee fourscore and 9. They cam to me, said that fair lady. Wow, they were flimsy things. Said, that chain o' good my doggie to haud, it is made o' they self-same rings. And didna ye get the locks my ain black hair, whilk I sent by post, whilk I sent by box, whilk I sent by the carrier? They cam to me, said that fair lady, and I prithee send nae mair. Said, that cushion sae red for my doggie's head is stuffed with they locks o' hair. And didna ye get the letter, lady, tied wi' a silken string, whilk I sent to thee frae the far country a message of love to bring? It cam to me frae the far country wi' its silken string and a', but it wasna prepaid, said that high-born maid, sae I garred them tak it awa'. Oh, ever alack that ye sent it back, it was written sae clerkly and well. Now the message it brought, and the boon that it sought, I must even say it mysel'. Then up and spake the popinjay, sae wisely counselled he. Now say it in the proper way, gae doon upon thy knee. The lover he turned baith red and pale, went doon upon his knee. O lady, hear the waesome tale that must be told to thee. For 5 lang years and 5 lang years I courted thee by looks, by nods and winks, by smiles and tears, as I had read in books. For 10 lang years, O weary hours, I courted thee by signs, by sending game, by sending flowers, by sending valentines. For 5 lang years and 5 lang years I have dwelt in the far country, till that thy mind should be inclined mair tenderly to me. Now 30 years are gane and past, I am come frae a foreign land, I am come to tell thee my love at last. O lady, gie me thy hand. The lady she turned not pale nor red, but she smiled a pitiful smile. Sic a curtain as yours, my man, she said, takes a lang and a weary while. And out and left the popinjay, a laugh of bitter scorn. A curtain done in sic a way, it ought not to be borne. With that the doggie barked aloud, and up and doon he ran, and tugged and strained his chain o' goad, all for to bite the man. Oh, hush thee, gentle popinjay, oh, hush thee, doggy dear. There is a word I fain would say, it needeth he should hear. Aye, louder screamed that lady fair to drown her doggy's bark. Ever the lover shouted mair to make that lady hark. Shrill and more shrill the popinjay upraised his angry squall. I trow the doggy's voice that day was louder than them all. The serving men and serving maids sat by the kitchen fire. They heard sic a din the parlour within as made them much admire. Out spake the boy in buttons, a weenie wasna thin. Now wha will tae the parlour gae and stay this deadly din? And they have ta'en a kerchief, casted their kevils in, for why should tae the parlour gae and stay that deadly din? When on that boy the kevil fell to stay the fearsome noise, "Gae in," they cried, "whate'er betide, thou prince of button boys." Syne he has ta'en a supple cane to swinge that dog sae fat. The doggy yowled, the doggy howled, the louder I for that. Syne he has ta'en a mutton bane, the doggy ceased his noise, and followed doon the kitchen stair that prince of button boys. Then sadly spake that lady fair wi' a frown upon her brow, "Oh, dearer to me is my sma' doggy than a dozen sic as thou." Nae use for sighs and tears, nae use at all to fret. Since you've bided so well for 30 years, you may bide a wee langer yet. Sadly, sadly he crossed the floor and tirled at the pin. Sadly went he through the door, where sadly he cam in. Oh, gin I had a popinjay to flew aboon my head, to tell me what I ought to say, I had by this been wed. Oh, gin I find anither lady, he said wi' sighs and tears, I wot my courtin' shall not be anither 30 years. For gin I find a lady gay, exactly to my taste, I'll pop the question aye or nay.
Four Riddles by Lewis Carroll, read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. These consist of 2 double acrostics and 2 charades. Number 1 was written at the request of some young friends who had gone to a ball at an Oxford commemoration, and also as a specimen of what might be done by making the double acrostic a connected poem instead of what it has hitherto been, a string of disjointed stanzas on every conceivable subject, and about as interesting to read straight through as a page of a cyclopedia. The first 2 stanzas describe the 2 main words, and each subsequent stanza one of the cross lights. Number 2 was written after seeing Miss Ellen Terry perform in the play of Hamlet. In this case, the first stanza describes the 2 main words. Number 3 was written after seeing Miss Marion Terry perform in Mr. Gilbert's play of Pygmalion and Galatea. The 3 stanzas respectively describe my first, my second, and my whole. 1. There was an ancient city stricken down with a strange frenzy, and for many a day they paced from morn to eve the crowded town, and danced the night away. I asked the cause. The aged man grew sad. They pointed to a building gray and tall, and hoarsely answered, "Step inside, my lad, and then you'll see it all." Yet what are all such gaieties to me, whose thoughts are full of indices and surds? X squared plus 7x plus 53 equals 11/3. But something whispered, "It will soon be done. Bands cannot always play, nor ladies smile. Endure with patience the distasteful fun for just a little while." A change came o'er my vision. It was night. We clove a pathway through a frantic throng. The steeds, wild plunging, filled us with affright. The chariots whirled along. Within a marble hall a river ran, a living tide, half muslin and half cloth. And here one mourned a broken wreath or fan, yet swallowed down her wrath. And here one offered to a thirsty fair his words half drowned amid those thunders tuneful, some frozen viand. There were many there, a toothache in each spoonful. There comes a happy pause, for human strength will not endure to dance without cessation, and every one must reach the point at length of absolute prostration. At such a moment ladies learn to give, to partners who would urge them overmuch, a flat and yet decided negative. Photographers love such. There comes a welcome summons, hope revives, and fading eyes grow bright and pulses quicken. Incessant pop the corks, and busy knives dispense the tongue and chicken. Flushed with new life, the crowd flows back again, and all is tangled talk and mazy motion, much like a waving field of golden grain, or tempestuous ocean. And thus they give the time, that nature meant for peaceful sleep and meditative snores, to ceaseless din and mindless merriment and waste of shoes and floors. And one, we name him not, that flies the flowers, that dreads the dances, and that shuns the salads, they doom to pass in solitude the hours, writing acrostic ballads. How late it grows! The hour is surely past that should have warned us with its double knock. The twilight wanes, and morning comes at last. "Oh, uncle, what's o'clock?" The uncle gravely nods and wisely winks. It may mean much, but how is one to know? He opes his mouth, yet out of it methinks no words of wisdom flow. 2. Empress of art, for thee I twine this wreath with all too slender skill. Forgive my muse each halting line, and for the deed accept the will. O day of tears, whence comes this spectre grim, parting like death's cold river souls that love? Is not he bound to thee as thou to him, by vows unwhispered here, yet heard above? And still it lives, that keen and heavenward flame, lives in his eye and trembles in his tone. And these wild words of fury but proclaim a heart that beats for thee alone. But all is lost. That mighty mind o'erthrown, like sweet bells jangled, piteous sight to see. Doubt that the stars are fire, so runs his moan. Doubt truth herself, but not my love for thee. A sadder vision yet. Thine aged sire shaming his hoary locks with treacherous wile. And dost thou now doubt truth to be a liar? And wilt thou die that hast forgot to smile? Nay, get thee hence. Leave all thy winsome ways, and the faint fragrance of thy scattered flowers. In holy silence wait the appointed days, and weep away the leaden-footed hours. 3. The air is bright with hues of light, and rich with laughter and with singing. Young hearts beat high in ecstasy, and banners wave and bells are ringing, but silence falls with fading day, and there's an end to mirth and play. Ah, well a day! Rest your old bones, ye wrinkled crones. The kettle sings, the firelight dances. Deep be it quaffed, the magic draught that fills the soul with golden fancies. For youth and pleasance will not stay, and ye are withered, worn and gray. Ah, well a day! O fair cold face, O form of grace for human passion madly yearning, O weary air of dumb despair, from marble won to marble turning, Leave us not thus, we fondly pray. We cannot let thee pass away. Ah, well a day. 4. My first is singular at best, more plural is my second. My third is far the pluralest, so plural, plural, I protest. It scarcely can be reckoned. My first is followed by a bird, my second by believers in magic art. My simple third follows too often hopes absurd and plausible deceivers. My first to get at wisdom tries, a failure melancholy. My second men revered as wise. My third from heights of wisdom flies to depths of frantic folly. My first is aging day by day, my second's age is ended. My third enjoys an age, they say, that never seems to fade away through centuries extended. My whole? I need a poet's pen to paint her myriad phases, the monarch and the slave of men, a mountain summit and a den of dark and deadly mazes, a flashing light, a fleeting shade, beginning, end, and middle of all that human art hath made, or wit devised. Go see.
Fame's Penny Trumpet by Lewis Carroll. Read for LibriVox.org by Anusha Iyer. Affectionately dedicated to all original researchers who pant for endowment. Blow, blow your trumpets till they crack, ye little men of little souls, and bid them huddle at your back, gold-sucking leeches, shoals on shoals. Fill all the air with hungry wails. Reward us ere we think or write. Without your gold mere knowledge fails to sate the swinish appetite. And where great Plato paced serene, or Newton paused with wistful eye, rush to the chase with hoofs unclean, and babble clamour of the sty. Be yours the pay, be theirs the praise. We will not rob them of their due, nor vex the ghosts of other days by naming them along with you. They sought and found undying fame, they toiled not for reward nor thanks. Their cheeks are hot with honest shame, for you, the modern mountebanks, who preach of justice, plead with tears, that love and mercy should abound, while marking with complacent ears the moaning of some tortured hound. Who prate of wisdom, nay, forbear, lest wisdom turn on you in wrath, trampling, with heel that will not spare, the vermin that beset her paths. Go, throng each other's drawing-rooms, ye idols of a petty clique, strut your brief hour in borrowed plumes, and make your penny trumpets squeak. Deck your dull talk with pilfered shreds of learning from a nobler time, and oil each other's little heads with mutual flattery's golden slime. And when the topmost height ye gain, and stand in glory's ether clear, and grasp the prize of all your pain, so many £100 a year, then let fame's banner be unfurled, sing paeans for a victory won, ye tapers that would light the world and cast a shadow on the sun, who still shall pour his rays sublime, one crystal flood from east to west, when ye have burned your little time and feebly flickered into rest.